Sure. Here's your story expanded to about 600 words in simple, easy English, following your outline and style. Mom always told me money can't buy love. Then she came knocking on my door asking for a $10,000 loan. That's when I realized the person I trusted most could also be the one to betray me. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. I am Lyra West, 28 years old, and I've worked hard my whole life to build my independence. I recently bought my first house and was finally feeling proud of what I had accomplished on my own. I love my job as a graphic designer, and for the first time in years, I felt truly free. But all of that changed the day my mother, Dory West, showed up at my doorstep. Dory has always been charming. She could smile and make anyone believe she had the best intentions. But I had learned over the years that her charm often hid selfishness. Growing up, she preached lessons about love, honesty, and integrity, but her actions didn't always match her words. She was manipulative, though she rarely admitted it, and she had a way of making you feel guilty for even questioning her. When she appeared at my door that morning, she was carrying a small suitcase and a sad expression. She explained she was in trouble and needed a loan. I froze. $10,000. It was a huge amount, more than I had saved for emergencies. My mind raced. I remembered every time she had lectured me about money not being important, about how love and family were more valuable than. And now, she was asking for exactly what she said didn't matter. I hesitated, unsure if I could trust her. But the guilt crept in. She looked vulnerable, tired, and scared, and I wanted to help. I finally agreed to lend her the money, making her promise she would pay me back as soon as possible. She hugged me tightly, tears in her eyes, and whispered, "I don't know what I would do without you, Lyra." I wanted to believe her, to think she had changed. For the first few weeks, everything seemed normal. But then small things started to bother me. She would talk about buying new clothes, going out to fancy restaurants, and taking trips she claimed she couldn't afford before. It didn't make sense. I asked gently if the money was being used for bills or urgent expenses, but she always had an excuse. "It's complicated," she would say, or "I'll pay you back soon, I promise." A close friend, Tess, noticed the stress on my face and warned me. "Lyra, your mom has always done this. She takes what she wants and makes people feel guilty when they notice." I didn't want to believe it, but the more I watched her, the more I realized the truth. She wasn't in trouble, she was using me. The betrayal cut deep. The woman who had raised me, who had taught me about love and family, was showing me that her love was conditional, based on what she could get from me. I felt anger, sadness, and disappointment all at once. I knew I had to protect myself. I couldn't let her manipulate me anymore. That day, as she sat sipping coffee in my living room, I made a decision. I would confront her, set boundaries, and reclaim control of my life. It was painful, but I knew it was the only way to stop the cycle of lies and guilt. The person I had trusted the most had betrayed me, and it was time to take a stand, not out of revenge, but out of self-respect. As I listened to my mother's pleading, my mind kept drifting back to the countless lessons she had drilled into me as a child. She always said that money couldn't buy love, that generosity and kindness were worth more than a fat bank account. I remembered the time she refused to pay for a neighbor's broken fence, saying, "Love isn't about covering someone else's mistakes." At the time, I thought she was wise, but now her words felt twisted, almost ironic, considering the situation unfolding in front of me. I wanted to refuse her, to protect the hard-earned money I had set aside for myself. Every instinct screamed to say no, to lock the door, and tell her she needed to figure it out on her. But the moment I looked into her eyes, so carefully crafted to appear desperate and worn, my resolve wavered. I could see her shoulders slump, hear the slight quiver in her voice, and I felt a pang of guilt twist in my chest. Could I really turn her away when she claimed she had nowhere else to turn? After a long pause, I finally nodded. "Okay, Mom," I said quietly, trying to steady my voice. "I'll help you." Her face brightened immediately, the sadness melting into what felt like relief. She reached out, touching my hand with a softness that almost fooled me into thinking she truly appreciated the sacrifice I was making. "Thank you, Lyra. I promise, I'll pay you back as soon as I can. You have no idea how much this means to me," she whispered. Her tone was carefully measured, a perfect balance of warmth and contrition. As I handed her the check, I couldn't shake the nagging unease. Memories surfaced unbidden, small moments from my childhood when her generosity had been selective. There was the time she spent weeks shopping for herself while claiming we couldn't afford my school trip, the afternoons she skipped my recitals to go out with friends, the holidays when she bought gifts for everyone except me. Those moments had always hurt, but I had brushed them aside, excusing her behavior with excuses I told myself. Maybe she had been struggling, maybe she had been stressed. Yet now the old patterns seemed to line up like a map, pointing to a side of her I had never fully acknowledged. Even as she smiled at me, thanking me again, I could sense a subtle calculation in her eyes, a faint glimmer that suggested she knew exactly how to push my button. She had always been clever at wrapping her self-interest in the guise of love and concern. That realization settled in my chest like a cold weight. I told myself to trust her, to believe that this time was different. But I also couldn't ignore the unease twisting in my stomach. It was hard to reconcile the loving mother I wanted to believe in with the woman who had carefully navigated her own desires at the expense of mine for so long. Could this really be just a genuine request for help, or was it something more? The thought gnawed at me, but I pushed it aside, trying to focus on the act of helping rather than the intentions behind it. As she left my house, clutching the check with a tight grip, I forced a smile and a wave. Deep down, though, I couldn't shake the lingering doubt. Something about her gratitude felt rehearsed, almost too perfect, and the memory of past selfishness hovered at the edges of my mind. That unease was subtle, quiet, but persistent, a warning that this simple act of lending money might carry consequences I wasn't prepared for. Even as I closed the door behind her, a small part of me braced for the day when my instincts would prove right, when the line between love and manipulation would become impossible to ignore. A few weeks passed, and I began to notice things that didn't sit right. Dory had the check in her hands, yet I kept hearing stories from neighbors and acquaintances about her new purchases. Expensive dinners, boutique clothing, even a weekend getaway that she insisted she desperately needed. Each detail sank into me like a tiny knife. I tried to reason it away, telling myself that maybe she was using some of my loan for necessities I couldn't see. But the pattern was undeniable, and the knot of unease in my chest grew heavier with every passing day. One evening, I met my friend Tess for coffee, hoping to vent a little. Tess had known my mother for years and had always been straightforward about her personality. "Lyra," she said, her voice gentle but firm, "I've seen this before. Your mom has a way of leaning on people, taking what she wants, and making them feel guilty when they hesitate. You've got to be careful." Her words hit me harder than I expected. I tried to brush them off at first, but as Tess spoke, I realized she wasn't exaggerating. It was like a switch flipped in my mind. I started to recall small incidents I had previously dismissed. The times Dory would exaggerate bills to make me feel responsible for helping her more, the subtle blame she cast when I questioned her choices, the way she made me feel selfish for even considering my own needs. Tess's words made me see the situation clearly. Despite the growing anger, I felt torn. Love for my mother ran deep, a stubborn thread woven through years of memories and shared experience. I wanted to believe she had genuine intentions, that she truly needed help, and that I was doing the right thing. But that love was now tangled with frustration, with a sense of being used. It was exhausting to navigate the conflicting emotions, the warmth of loyalty battling the sharp sting of betrayal. Every interaction began to feel charged with tension. When I asked about a payment, Dory would shift the topic or brush me off with excuses. "The utilities took longer than I expected," she said once, her tone almost casual, as if the debt was insignificant. Another time, she implied that I wasn't supportive enough, that I was too harsh for questioning her. These moments, small as they were, piled up, each one a reminder that the woman I had trusted could twist situations to suit her narrative. Even simple phone calls started to feel like traps. I could hear the careful construction in her voice, the way she framed her words to make me feel responsible for her struggles while masking her own choices. A sinking realization settled in. My generosity was being exploited, and every act of kindness was met with manipulation rather than gratitude. The conflict gnawed at me day and night. I wanted to confront her, to demand honesty and accountability, but part of me hesitated, afraid of what that confrontation might stir. Could I break through her charm, or would I be dismissed and guilt once again? The doubt was heavy, but so was the resolve growing quietly inside me. I couldn't ignore the pattern any longer. By the end of the week, I started keeping track of her excuses, her stories, and the ways she subtly shifted blame onto me. Each record was a small act of preparation, a way to protect myself from further manipulation. My love for her remained, stubborn and persistent, but it no longer blinded me. Somewhere beneath the anger and disappointment, a determination took root. I wouldn't let her take advantage of me without consequence. After weeks of tension, I started keeping my distance from my mother. I made excuses to avoid visits and kept my phone calls short. Each time I saw her, a wave of guilt washed over me. I hated feeling this way. She was my mother, after all. Was I really being unfair? Was I overreacting to small things? The questions gnawed at me, but I couldn't shake the unease that had settled deep in my chest. Late one night, memories from my childhood came rushing back. I remembered long afternoons when she would leave me at home to run errands that suited her whims, choosing her comfort over my needs. Birthdays spent quietly while she entertained friends. Holidays where I watched her enjoy herself, while my small requests were dismissed as unimportant. I had learned to accept these slights as normal, convincing myself that love required sacrifice. Now, looking back, I realized I had been making excuses for patterns that weren't fair or healthy. The more I reflected, the more I noticed the subtle ways she had trained me to feel responsible for her happiness. Every time she frowned or sighed heavily, I felt a twinge of guilt, even when it wasn't my fault. She had a way of making her disappointment feel like my failure. And now, in adulthood, the same patterns were resurfacing. She would cry softly about her struggles, look at me with wide, sad eyes, and speak in a tone designed to tug at my heart. I could see through it, but part of me still ached at the sight of her tears. It was exhausting, confusing, and deeply frustrating. Things became even more complicated when she introduced me to her new boyfriend, Carl. From the first meeting, something about him felt off. He had a slick, overly confident demeanor, always praising Dory for her strength, while subtly reinforcing her manipulations. He laughed at her jokes, even the ones that made me uncomfortable, and nodded approvingly when she twisted stories to make herself look like a victim. Watching them together, I could feel the way he amplified her control, giving her a partner in the subtle games she had always played. It made my stomach turn, realizing that she now had someone else to bolster her schemes, someone who seemed completely willing to manipulate alongside her. I began to retreat further, protecting myself from the constant emotional tug-of-war. I loved her, but I couldn't allow myself to be pulled into guilt trips and staged vulnerability anymore. Every interaction became a careful negotiation, and every conversation left me exhausted. I wanted to be a daughter who cared, but I also wanted to be a woman who preserved her own well-being. The conflict between love and self-preservation weighed heavily on me. Even in solitude, I felt the strain. I replayed our interactions in my mind, analyzing every expression, every sigh, every subtle accusation. It was like walking a tightrope, one misstep, and the guilt could swallow me whole. Yet, amid the exhaustion, I knew I couldn't keep giving without boundaries. I couldn't let her and Carl manipulate me into sacrificing my peace for their comfort. Something had to change, even if it meant facing difficult truths about the woman who had always called herself my mother. I never expected to find proof of what I had been suspecting, but one afternoon, while helping a friend organize her finances, I glanced at a receipt Dory had accidentally left in her bag when she visited. It was for a designer handbag, a fancy dinner, and tickets to a weekend getaway, things she had claimed she couldn't afford. My stomach sank. She hadn't been paying bills or covering essentials. She was spending my money on indulgences. The realization hit me like a punch to the chest, sharp and unrelenting. I confronted her that evening, my voice trembling but firm. "Mom, I know what you've been doing with the money. These aren't bills. This isn't what I agreed to help you with." Her reaction was immediate. She recoiled as if I had accused her of a crime, her eyes narrowing. "Lyra, how dare you? You're ungrateful. I thought you trusted me," she snapped, her words dripping with indignation. She twisted the situation, turning the blame onto me, accusing me of overreacting and failing to understand her struggles. It was infuriating, but it was also familiar. This was how she always protected herself, by making me feel guilty and small. I felt a rush of all the past injustices flood back. I remembered birthdays she had spent on herself while I quietly wished for a gift. The vacations she prioritized while I stayed home, feeling invisible. The countless times she insisted that material things didn't matter, yet she spent money recklessly whenever she felt like it. Each memory weighed on me, a heavy reminder of a pattern I had ignored for too long. My anger and sadness combined, creating a storm I could no longer suppress. Tears stung my eyes, but I refused to let them cloud my resolve. I realized I had to stop pretending that this behavior was acceptable or temporary. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the betrayal, the manipulation, and the repeated disregard for my feeling. I couldn't continue enabling her. I couldn't allow my kindness to be exploited any longer. In that moment, I made a decision. I would not let this betrayal continue. I would set boundaries, demand accountability, and protect myself from further manipulation. My love for her didn't mean I had to accept being used. I would confront her behavior, not out of revenge, but out of necessity, to reclaim my dignity and peace of mind. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of clarity. The fear of hurting her, of causing conflict, was overshadowed by the knowledge that ignoring this would only prolong the cycle of betrayal. I could no longer let her charm and guilt dictate my actions. I had to take a stand. That evening, as I watched her leave, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and empowerment. I was grieving the illusions I had held about her, but I was also finding strength I hadn't realized I possessed. The breaking point had arrived, and with it came the first real step toward protecting myself from a pattern of selfishness that had lasted far too long. After the confrontation, I realized that simply cutting ties wouldn't feel enough. I needed clarity and control. Quietly, I began keeping a detailed record of every instance where Dory bent the truth or manipulated the situation. I noted every excuse, every exaggerated hardship, every subtle attempt to make me feel responsible for her choices. Writing it down made me feel less powerless and more grounded. Curiosity and a need for certainty pushed me further. I started reviewing her financial activity, looking at documents she had carelessly left around during her visits. It didn't take long for me to uncover inconsistencies, small fraudulent charges, hidden loans, and debts she had never mentioned. None of it was catastrophic on its own, but together, it painted a pattern of dishonesty and recklessness. The person I had trusted to teach me about integrity had been hiding things from me all along. As I gathered evidence, a mix of emotions washed over me. Part of me felt hurt, seeing the extent of her deception laid out so clearly. Another part burned with anger, realizing how long she had manipulated situations for her own benefit. But underneath it all, I felt a growing sense of determination. I wasn't doing this to shame her or hurt her. I was doing it for myself, to reclaim the power I had unknowingly given away for so many years. I spent hours reflecting on the years I had spent accommodating her whims, justifying her lies, and feeling guilty for asserting my own needs. I thought about the little girl who had waited for attention, whose requests were often ignored, and who learned early that love sometimes came at the cost of her own voice. That child was still inside me, but she had grown stronger, wiser, and more self-reliant. I could finally see the progress I had made, and it gave me courage. Making a plan wasn't easy. I had to balance my desire for justice with a need to remain composed and fair. I couldn't act on impulse. I had to ensure that my actions were measured and intentional. Every note, every document, every piece of evidence became part of a carefully built foundation to support me if I needed to confront her publicly or protect myself legally. There were nights I sat alone, thinking about how different things could have been if I had spoken up sooner. But I reminded myself that growth takes time, and the lessons I had learned through pain were now my strongest allies. The preparation itself became empowering. I no longer felt like a victim of circumstance or manipulation. Instead, I felt a sense of control I had never experienced before, knowing that when the time came, I could face her with undeniable truth. By the time I finished my documentation, I felt ready. The anger that had bubbled beneath the surface had transformed into clarity and resolve. I knew exactly what I had to do, not to humiliate her, not to seek revenge for its own sake, but to finally protect myself and establish boundaries that could never be crossed again. I had grown into someone capable of standing firm, someone who refused to let manipulation dictate the course of her life. For the first time, I felt completely prepared. I invited Dory over one evening, suggesting we have a quiet dinner together, just the two of us. I kept my tone light, casual, the kind of invitation that wouldn't raise suspicion. She accepted immediately, flashing a pleased smile that didn't reach her eyes. I watched her drive up the street, her usual air of confidence intact, unaware that tonight, the dynamic between us would shift. As we settled at the table, I kept the conversation easy at first, talking about neutral topics, complimenting the meal I had prepared, letting her settle into her comfort zone. She laughed easily, shared small stories from her day, and I nodded along, all the while feeling a tension coiling in my chest. I waited until the right moment, until the familiar comfort she felt around me made her vulnerable to the truth. When I finally spoke, my voice was calm but steady. "Mom, I need to show you something," I said, sliding a folder across the table. Inside were pages of receipts, statements, and notes I had carefully compiled over the past week. Each piece clearly showed the loans, the purchases, the manipulations. I watched her reaction closely. At first, her smile faltered, then disappeared altogether. Her fingers trembled slightly as she picked up a page, scanning the detail. "Lyra, you don't understand," she began, her tone pleading. "I had reasons for everything. You're blowing this out of proportion." She tried to charm me, leaning forward with a soft, coaxing voice, attempting to guilt me. "I'm your mother. I've always done my best for you. How can you question me like this?" But I remained composed, steadying my breathing and keeping my gaze fixed on her. I could feel my own emotions building, anger, disappointment, and a sorrow that ran deep. I had spent years defending her, rationalizing her actions, excusing her behavior, and now it was time to face the truth. "Mom, it's not about questioning your love," I said firmly. "It's about acknowledging the ways you've been dishonest and taking responsibility. I can't let this continue." Her expression shifted rapidly, a mixture of fear, denial, and frustration. She flailed verbally, trying to twist every statement to frame herself as the victim, to make me doubt my own convictions. "You're being cruel, Lyra. You think you're so smart, but you don't know the whole story. I've sacrificed for you in ways you can't even imagine." Her voice broke, and I could see the tears forming, staged as always, designed to pull at my empathy. I took a deep breath, letting all the years of manipulation, guilt, and excuses crystallize in my mind. I felt the weight of every incident, every subtle betrayal, every moment I had second-guessed myself for questioning her. The mix of love and anger surged, raw and undeniable. "I do know," I said quietly but firmly. "I've been watching, I've been listening, and I've been taking notes. This ends tonight. I love you, but I will not allow deceit to dictate our relationship any longer." For a long moment, she was silent, staring at me, as if processing a truth she had refused to acknowledge for decades. The tension in the room was thick, electric, filled with every memory, every confrontation that had gone unspoken until now. I could see her pride cracking, the carefully constructed mask faltering, revealing a flicker of vulnerability she hadn't shown before. The confrontation was over, yet it felt like the beginning of something new. The room held both love and anger, sorrow and clarity. I felt the first real sense of control I had experienced in years. For the first time, I had spoken my truth and I had held my ground. The raw emotion lingered, powerful and necessary, a testament to how much I had grown and how far I had come. After the confrontation, I knew it wasn't enough to simply speak the truth. I needed to ensure that Dory could no longer manipulate me or exploit my generosity. The first step was securing my finances. I met with my bank quietly, explaining the situation and requesting measures to block any access she might still have. The process was meticulous, but by the end of the day, I had full control over my accounts. The relief was immediate, a weight lifting from my shoulders as I realized she could no longer touch what was mine. Next, I turned my attention to the consequences she had so far avoided. I contacted her creditors anonymously, providing documentation of her spending patterns and outstanding debts. It wasn't about revenge in a cruel sense. It was about accountability. She had acted recklessly with funds that weren't hers, and it was time for her to face the repercussions. I watched quietly as letters and notices started arriving, her careful facade beginning to crumble. The impact was swift. The weekend getaway she had bragged about had to be postponed, her credit cards were scrutinized, and the luxuries she had flaunted were suddenly out of reach. It wasn't a punishment I imposed in anger, but a consequence of her own actions. I made sure she could feel the effect of her choices without putting her life in danger. The satisfaction wasn't in humiliation, but in justice. The balance she had upset for so long was being restored. Even as I executed these steps, I was mindful of maintaining discretion. This wasn't about embarrassing her in front of friends or neighbors, and I refused to engage in gossip. My aim was clarity and consequence, not public spectacle. I wanted her to recognize her patterns, to feel the responsibility she had so long avoided. I had no desire to torment her, only to reclaim the power that had been misused for years. The weeks that followed were revealing. I noticed subtle changes in her behavior, small frustrations when she realized she couldn't access certain accounts, minor complaints about delayed payments, and careful calculations before any new purchases. She was forced to confront her own recklessness, to reckon with the reality she had created for herself. I observed silently, neither celebrating nor gloating, simply taking note of the shift in balance. For me, the effect was transformative. I no longer felt anxious about unexpected visits or calls demanding financial help. I could finally plan my life without the constant shadow of guilt hanging over me. I had taken control in a way that was firm, measured, and effective. The actions I took were deliberate, each one a step toward ensuring that my boundaries could never again be violated. Even though Dory lost temporary access to her lifestyle luxuries, I didn't relish it. I understood that this was a moment of learning for her, a necessary confrontation with reality that her charm and manipulation had previously shielded her. It was a quiet victory, one rooted in the assertion of my own autonomy and self-respect, rather than petty retribution. By the time the dust settled, I felt a calm I hadn't experienced in years. The cycle of exploitation was broken. I had acted with precision and thoughtfulness, turning anger into empowerment. The relationship remained complicated, but I no longer felt powerless. I had established limits that even she could not breach, and in doing so, I had ensured that fairness, honesty, and responsibility would finally shape the path forward. After all that had happened, a strange mixture of emotions settled over me. On some mornings, I found myself missing the familiar voice of my mother, the way she could still make me laugh despite everything. There were moments when I longed for the comfort of shared memories, the warmth of a hug that once felt safe. Yet alongside that longing was an undeniable sense of relief, a freedom I had not realized I craved until it was fully within my grasp. The tension that had shadowed my life for years had finally lifted, leaving me with space to breathe and think clearly. Dory left my house for a while, claiming she needed time to sort things out. I suspected it was more than that. It was the first time she had been forced to truly face the consequences of her actions without my immediate intervention. Her temporary absence created a quiet in my life that was both unsettling and restorative. Without her constant presence and subtle manipulations, I began to notice how much energy I had previously expended managing her moods, her guilt trips, and her expectations. The weight of obligation that had clung to me for decades was slowly dissolving. In the solitude of my home, I reflected on everything I had learned. It was painful to admit, but necessary. Love does not require sacrificing your own boundaries or well-being. For too long, I had equated caring for my mother with accepting her destructive behavior. I had believed that love demanded compliance, that family meant tolerating manipulation and dishonesty. Now, I understood that true love could exist alongside firm limits, that compassion did not have to come at the cost of self-respect. This realization was both heartbreaking and liberating. Even as I mourned the idealized version of our relationship, I felt a quiet pride in what I had accomplished. The victory wasn't flashy or dramatic. It was subtle, internal, and profound. I had reclaimed control over my life, my finances, and my emotional space. Each decision I made had been deliberate, guided by reason and principle rather than impulse or fear. The clarity I now felt was a reward for years of patience, observation, and careful planning. I began to notice small signs of empowerment in my daily life. Tasks that once felt draining, like managing household responsibilities or balancing my career, now felt lighter. I could focus on personal projects without the constant background noise of tension or guilt. Even simple moments, like reading a book in peace or cooking dinner without interruptions, carried a sense of triumph I hadn't anticipated. These small victories reminded me that liberation often comes in quiet, unassuming ways, rather than in grand gestures or dramatic confrontations. Despite the lingering complexity of our relationship, I felt capable of approaching the future with a renewed sense of confidence. I had established boundaries that even my mother could not overstep, and that knowledge provided a lasting foundation for interactions moving forward. The lessons I had learned, the importance of accountability, self-respect, and emotional resilience, would guide me in ways that were both practical and deeply personal. As I sat in my living room one evening, watching the sunset spill warm light across the walls, I felt a sense of balance I hadn't known for years. Part of me still carried sadness for the distance between us, but the stronger part celebrated the peace I had carved out for myself. I was free from manipulation, free from guilt, and free to live on my own terms. In that quiet moment, I realized that victory wasn't about punishment or revenge. It was about taking ownership of my life and refusing to let anyone compromise it again. Looking back, I can see how everything unfolded as a turning point in my life. The betrayal I experienced didn't just hurt. It forced me to confront patterns I had ignored for years and to reassess the way I allowed others to influence my choices. Every uncomfortable conversation, every moment of tension, and every ounce of doubt contributed to shaping a version of myself that I didn't fully recognize at first, but one that I have come to respect deeply. I have grown into someone more self-aware and resilient. Where I once allowed guilt or charm to sway my decisions, I now recognize the importance of standing firm. I understand my own worth, and I no longer feel obligated to bend my life to accommodate the selfish desires of others. My boundaries are clear, and I have learned that protecting them is not an act of cruelty, but of self-preservation. This awareness brings a quiet confidence I never possessed before, a calm in the face of manipulation that used to leave me anxious and uncertain. Along with boundaries comes a deeper sense of emotional maturity. I have learned to navigate complex feelings, love, anger, disappointment, and grief, without letting them dictate my actions blindly. I can hold conflicting emotions at the same time, care for someone, even after betrayal, while refusing to accept repeated harm. This ability has changed the way I view relationships, giving me insight into the delicate balance between empathy and self-respect. The lessons I carry now extend beyond my relationship with my mother. I understand that betrayal, though painful, can be transformative. It is not simply an event to endure, but a catalyst to grow, to recognize patterns that are unhealthy, and to take conscious steps toward a life that honors one's own dignity. I've realized that standing up for myself isn't a rejection of love. It is, in its own way, an expression of it. It is proof that I value honesty, respect, and fairness, and that I am willing to act to preserve these principles. Even as I feel a lingering sadness for the distance that exists between my mother and me, it is tempered by empathy. I see the consequences of her choices, the ways she has struggled to navigate life without accountability, and I feel compassion, even as I maintain my boundaries. This blend of sorrow and understanding leaves me stronger, aware of the complexity of human relationships, and prepared to face them with both caution and openness. In this space of reflection, I find empowerment. I am free from the weight of manipulation and ready to make decisions rooted in my own judgment. Life is quieter, more deliberate, and richer for the lessons learned. The journey has been painful, yes, but it has also granted me insight, strength, and a profound sense of control over my own path. Betrayal taught me that love does not require surrendering oneself. Protecting one's boundaries, demanding respect, and confronting dishonesty are acts of courage, and they are, ultimately, acts of love, too. It is a lesson I will carry forward, with both a tender heart and a firm resolve. Hey besties, thanks for sticking around till the end. Life can be full of unexpected betrayal, even from those we love most, but facing it can make us stronger than we ever imagined. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, share, leave a comment, and subscribe for more heartfelt stories. Your support means the world, and I can't wait to share the next one. Bye!